And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a really delicious and hearty soup for you. This is a beet, spinach, and roasted barley soup. Now before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we have an affiliate link with Chef's Temp. If you need a kitchen thermometer or meat probe, please check out the link in the description below and use code LOVEYOURFOOD on checkout for 15% off your order. We also have a Patreon. If you'd like to support us there, I'll put a link for that in the description as well. In the meantime, here's our ingredients. So we've got some beets. We've got these strange, long, skinny beets. Some spinach. Some shallots. Some garlic. Some onions. This is a green garlic. Some carrot. Some barley. We're using just pot barley. Some celery. Some beef broth, although you can use vegetable broth, and some canned tomatoes. So we're going to start by toasting our barley. So we're just going to pop those into a pan and put those into, we've got a little toaster oven. We'll just get them nice and toasty in there until they're nice and dark like that. And then just set those aside. We're going to add those to the soup a little bit later. In the meantime, we're going to do all of our mise en place. So we're going to chop up our peeled carrots. You can see the peeled beets right next to them there. And we're not going to be blending this soup or anything, so we want these to look nice. We're going to get them as evenly cut as we can. We're going to cut these into quarters and then into little quarter discs. And we're going to do the beets the same way as the carrots. We're not sure why these beets are long and skinny, but they are. They were delicious. They came out really, really well. Whatever beets you have will work in this recipe. So then we're going to get some oil. We're using some olive oil in the pan here. We're going to get that nice and hot. And in goes the carrots and beets. We want these to get started first because they are going to take the longest to cook. So we want these to get in there first. We're going to get them coated in the oil. We're going to add a little bit of salt in there. But these we want to start a little early because we want them to cook a little bit more before we start adding in our other aromatics. We've got our garlic cloves here. These happen to be really small garlic cloves, so we're just going to cut them in half. It's kind of nice finding a big chunk of garlic in your soup. With the celery, we're just going to cut it into little half moons here, little crescent moons. And again, they don't need to be super, super small. They don't need to be super pretty, but you do want them as even as you can get them. Now, this is green garlic. You don't have to use this. If you want to use green onion, you can. If you want to use leek, you can as well. We're just going to chop this really nicely, pretty finely. You don't want it in big, big chunks. And we're going to use both the greens and the whites. And there we go. There's the whites, the greens, and the celery, and the garlic are all going to go in together now that the carrots and beets have had a little bit of time to start. So those are all going to go in. And we're going to add, we're going to chop up our shallots. Now for the shallots, we're just going to sort of slice them like this. We don't need them to be super, super fine. And in goes a little bit of salt, and we're going to stir that up. And you can see the beets and the carrots have already started to cook a little bit down at the bottom there. We're just going to get that all nice and stirred together. And this we're just going to let cook for a little while longer. We just want to let everything sort of start to wilt in there and the flavors start to come together. So we're going to put a lid on, sort of let it steam itself in there. And we're also going to chop our onions. Now we're going to do these pretty finely. We want them to kind of melt into the final recipe at the end. So once we've got those chopped, we're just going to toss those in on top of our already cooking beets and carrots in there. Don't worry about getting some of the beet juice. Everything's going to be red and beety by the end of this. A little bit more salt. And then we're just going to stir this all together. Now you can see the steam coming off of there. Everything is sort of steaming together. The carrots and beets have started to get a little soft around the edges. We're going to cover that and let it all sort of cook together again a little bit longer. Once again, until the things like the celery and the green onions and the onions have all had a chance to sort of soften a little bit and start to wilt. So once we have finished with that, we are going to add in our can of tomatoes. Now, we use canned whole tomatoes because we don't want this to be super, super thick, although in the end result, this is going to be kind of like a concentrated soup that we're going to put into some liter jars. Now, we go through it really quick. You can this and put it through the canning process. So we're going to break up the tomatoes a little bit, add in, we're going to swirl our beef broth around in the tomato can to make sure we get all the goodness out of there. And then we're going to add in some beef broth. Now, this is still going to be a very thick soup, so we're going to put this into cans. And when we go to serve it, we're going to dilute it with water or broth when we come to serve it. So it really is kind of like a soup concentrate like you'd get out of a can. And you'll see at the end how thick it is because it really does come out very, very thick. So we're going to put the beef broth in there and let it all simmer together for quite some time. We want those carrots and those beets to cook all the way through. And you can see here a piece of carrot there. It is cooked. It is softer, but it is still a little bit al dente. We don't want it to be mushy. And that's about where we're going to leave it. So we're going to put in our barley there and stir that in. And we're just going to let this cook for a little bit more after the barley. And then we're going to put this into our liter jars and let it cool. First we're adding, I completely forgot about the spinach. We're first adding our spinach. Now we're going to do this once the heat has been turned off because all the spinach has to do is wilt. And it'll just, really nicely incorporate in there. And the flavors of the spinach and the beets really complement each other really well, sort of brought together by the tomato. It all comes out really delicious. So there we go. We added a lot of spinach, and as you know, we just did a recipe on spinach not too long ago. As you know, the spinach just turns from a big heap into almost nothing. And the great thing about this is we're not losing any of the goodness from the spinach. We're not like wilting it in a pot and then we're throwing away the water from that. We're just tossing it all into the soup, so it's all going to be incorporated. We're going to get all of that goodness from the spinach in the soup. So there we go. We've got it all mixed together. We're going to let this cool down to room temp. We're going to put it into, like I said, jars. So the next day we got 2.5 liters out of this. So here's our half-liter jar, and you can see how thick it is. So we're going to put an equal amount of water or stock in here to thin it out and make it more like a soup instead of this concentrated soup. And this time we used water, and it's got plenty of flavor to go around. So we're going to taste it. It's a great time to taste it once it's coming up to temperature and adjust it. We're going to adjust it with a little bit of lemon juice, maybe a little bit of Tabasco, whatever you want. It's a great time to taste it and make sure you make adjustments to it. You can add a little salt if it needs it, some soy sauce, some Worcestershire sauce, whatever you decide it needs. And then it's time to serve it, so we're going to pop that into some bowls. And we actually treated this one a little bit like borscht, and we put a little sour cream or yogurt on top, and that little creaminess really kind of helps make everything pop. It's a really delicious soup and incredibly hearty, and that's it. That's the whole thing. We go through a lot of soups. We love this one. It was sort of an experiment, and it came out really well. The barley kind of gives it this amazing texture, and everything comes out so well together. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe, and if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, we'd like to thank our patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to support us there, I'll put a link for that in the description below. And remember to love your food.